My name is Mustafa Davis. I'm a photographer and filmmaker from California, from the Bay Area in California. I was born and raised in the Bay Area in California. I'm the son of artists. My mother is a painter and my father is a musician. And so I think becoming an artist was always going to be in my trajectory somehow. I converted to Islam in 1996 and then spent about a decade overseas in various countries studying the sacred tradition. I was in Morocco, Damascus, Syria. I was in Sudan for a while, spent 5 years in Tarim, Yemen, and then 4 years in Abu Dhabi, and then ended up going to film school and pursuing my career as a full-time filmmaker and media producer. My education in the arts is probably very underwhelming in comparison to some of the other people that you're going to be interviewing. I went to De Anza College in California, which is a community college, and so I did 2 years there. And then I did just a semester at San Jose State University. And then at this time, I converted to Islam. And so I left my secular academic studies and went overseas to pursue Islamic scholarship for about a decade. And then after that, or kind of in the midst of that, I leave and then I come back and then I do a film degree at New York Film Academy. And then I did the New York Film Academy in Hollywood. It's strange because it's New York Film Academy, but the base is in Hollywood. And the reason I chose that was that their campus is actually on the back lot of Universal Studios. And so as a part of our program, we were able to use the actual sets at Universal Studios to film our student films on. So I was filming on the sets of like Desperate Housewives, the film Jaws, Back to the Future, and a lot of old Western sets there. And so my education in film really comes, just about a 2-year process. And maybe we talk a little bit about that, because this is a career path that university education, I believe, isn't 100% necessary to pursue a career in this path. It's not really a degree path. It's more based on your artistic ability. And there's other ways that you can prove that than having a shahada or a degree or a piece of paper that says that you have the prerequisite requirement. Actually, after finishing film school, I don't have that kind of starving artist story that a lot of people do, where you start at the bottom and you work your way up. I sort of cheated that, fast-tracked it, because as soon as I graduated, I moved to Abu Dhabi in the UAE, and then I immediately took a position as a media director for a research foundation, and which was connected to television. So as soon as I graduate, I start making films already for television and for mainstream consumption. And so immediately after film school, I move, and then I start working as a director immediately. And then I made my first 2 feature films there, within the first year after I graduated. And so I really kind of fast-tracked myself, where the traditional approach is, especially in film, is you might start on the bottom as a production assistant, making coffee, getting copies, running around until you get noticed, and then hopefully someone will let you hold a camera at some point, and maybe you can prove that you can do it. I didn't have that. I fast-tracked it, and I thought that I was an anomaly in this sense, but I quickly realized that the film and the path of being a filmmaker is not necessarily your typical 4-year education type of job. And in fact, as someone who runs his own production company now, I'm very hesitant to hire someone who has a 4-year degree in film. I would prefer someone who's just got an idea, they want to start out and they're showing some talent. I would rather work with someone from that phase than someone who's got a bunch of film theory, but not practical experience. And I found this to be the case with a lot of my peers as well, who also run their own production companies. So in a sense, and maybe the parents of teens who might listen to this might not prefer this type of advice, but an actual 4-year degree or a master's degree in fine art in the career that I'm in could potentially work against you. I don't mean to say that you can't or you shouldn't go to university, but if you do, you need much more than just the degree. You have to have an ability to show that you can do the work. So if you go to university, you get the degree, but you don't have a portfolio of work that you can show when you're going to get your first job, then you're going to be starting over. So my suggestion is that if you are going to go and do that, and you're going to get like an MFA in fine arts or something, that you're working as you do it, so that as soon as you graduate, you're not starting at the bottom again, and you're not 4 years behind, but you have a body of work that you did while you were in university that you can show. And if somebody comes to me with that, then that's obviously ideal. Like, I would love someone who has the educational background with the work itself. But if somebody comes with just the degree without that work, in this instance, I would prefer the person that had the work versus just the degree. I didn't really choose it. My parents are artists, and they really pushed me in the arts myself. And, I started off as a photographer at a very young age. I was developing film in a homemade darkroom in our house. My stepfather was an amateur photographer. And so we had a homemade darkroom in our house. And so I was developing film at the age of 11. And so from a very young age, like, this was what I was going to do. And then, by the time I'm in high school, my father owned a video store. And I know that this generation now doesn't know what a video store is, but we used to actually have to go and buy VHS cassette tapes to put in our VCRs to watch films. And so he owned a video store. So I would just consume film after film, sometimes 2-3 films a day, foreign films, independent films, Hollywood films, all types of films. And so it was clear to me that this is what I wanted to do. I realized that filmmaking was photography, which coupled with writing and music and design and all these different arts. So for me, it was a clear path that, okay, you can still do photography, but you can tell these kind of greater stories if you decide to do film. And so it was something that I knew at a very young age that I wanted to do. Like, when I was like 10, 11, 12 years old, and people were, they asked the kids, like, what do you want to do? And everyone's saying, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a police officer, I want to be a fireman. I was always, I want to be a photographer, I want to be a filmmaker. So my day to day isn't as glamorous as people might think looking on the outside in. I do a lot of paperwork. I do a lot of writing. I do a lot of writing of proposals, and a lot of managerial type tasks, and a lot of fundraising, because to make a film, it costs money to do it. Especially if you're going to do it at a high production value, high level, it costs a lot of money sometimes. And so there's a joke amongst filmmakers that 70% of our time is spent fundraising, and 30% of our time is spent making films. And so I'm not just a filmmaker, so I don't do freelance film work. So I'm not like a gun for hire, because I have my own production company. So a lot of the time that we spend is just shooting the work that we do, and then editing the work. It's if you want me to be candid, it's a very exciting career. Like, I'm absolutely enthralled and in love with what I do. In fact, I'm likely unemployable at this point, because it's just so fun to do it independently, what we do. I don't know if I would be a good employee for another person's production company. But it's involved. The art is involved. If you wanted to know what the process of making a film is like, we could talk about that. But really, it's just we're spending the majority of our time in the studio, probably about 70% of the time in the studio, and 30% of the time is out shooting. In terms of ratios, it's about 30% of the time that you spend shooting, and the majority of the work that we do is in the editing process. I'll be very honest and say that, career in the arts, and particularly photography and film, which is what I do, and film is probably the majority of what I do, it should definitely be a labor of love, because the finances in it are not at all concrete. It's not the same as like if you're going to get a coding job or an engineering job, or you're going to get your degree in medicine and you're going to have 2 years residency. Like, the path to career in filmmaking is really all over the place. And it depends on what you do. If you're going to do freelance work versus if you're going to start your own production company, or versus if you're going to be kind of like a gun for hire in Hollywood, where so I can speak about the three very briefly. If you're going to be a gun for hire in Hollywood, meaning you're going to start at the bottom and work your way up, the salary that you could probably expect to make at this time in 2021 is probably going to be somewhere between $20,000 and $30,000. Because you're going to start as a production assistant, and it's going to take a number of years for you to work your way up that ladder. As a director, as a film director, a film producer is very similar to the career of an actor. right? They say that in Hollywood, that 10% of the actors and actresses make 90% of the money. And the rest of those people are kind of working in restaurants trying to make, you know, the starving artist story, right? They're working in restaurants trying to make it work, going to auditions. So for a filmmaker, a director, it's the same. You have to audition. You have to go and prove that you can be the one that's going to make this film. And so it doesn't always work out. In that district, it doesn't always work out. And so that's one. It's not, that's why I say it has to be a labor of love. It has to be something that you love to do. And it's something my father told me when I was first starting out. He said, you know, do what you love to do and the money will follow. And if the money never follows, then you're never going to complain about spending your entire life doing what you love. And so that's just my parents. I know a lot of parents might not agree with that. I chose to go the independent route, where I just started my own production company right out. And so it was about a 2 or 3 year period where you're working very hard. You're doing, you know, some menial jobs at times because you haven't proved yourself yet. And so you're not getting paid as much. And so I would say probably often there's about a 2 to 3 year period as you're getting started where you might have to have another job to do it. For just to be fully transparent, my first 5 years doing it, I was still working as a construction worker. I was doing painting, I was doing, you know, cabinetry, I was doing landscaping because I had a family at the time as well. I was already married and had children. And so I had to be able to make ends meet. And so, but I would say if you're talented and you're good at it, there's the potential and the possibility for you to have a very lucrative career if you're patient and you do the work and you're patient and you put the time in. And that's why I said if you're in university and you spend that time while you're doing your degree getting a portfolio of work, by the time you graduate, you can surpass that 4 or 3 year period and start immediately with your own production company. Freelancers, for freelancers, it's based on industry standard rates, depending on what job you have. And so it's kind of all over the place. If you're going to be an editor, if you're going to be a producer, associate producer, director of photography, a camera assistant, all these different careers have different income levels. And so it's going to be difficult for me to delineate what that is. But a simple Google search for, you know, starting positions in these particular positions will kind of tell you where you could start. So I've made many mistakes. I graduated from film school in 2004, and it's now 2021. In that time period, I've made insurmountable mistakes, so many of them. But I would say probably the biggest mistake, if I was going to choose one, would be after making my first 2 feature films. My first 2 feature documentaries, I got a bit ahead of myself. And I felt that, wow, I'm young. I've already made 2 feature films, in my own thought process at the time, very clearly, I'm on the path to making it. I'm probably going to be a big name in Hollywood, like Spielberg or Lucas or these guys. And so I packed my family up and I moved to Hollywood. And this is about 2 or 3 years after I graduated film school. And I landed in Hollywood expecting red carpet to be rolled out. Here comes Mustafa Davis. Let's make way for him. He's about to be the greatest filmmaker of all time. And Hollywood slammed its door right in my face. They didn't care. The only jobs I could get was working on the set of like CSI or something like that, just getting coffee for people. The fact that I'd made 2 feature documentary films didn't mean much to them. And so I got ahead of myself. Had I waited another 2 years and got a little more experience under my belt and had a few more films under my belt and then made that move, I think that situation would have gone a lot different. And so I guess my lesson and maybe my advice to other people is really assess yourself properly. Know where you're at and at what moment you should execute. And one of the best ways you can do that is by having mentors. Right? Especially in these creative paths, you need to have mentors. Get a mentor who's done what it is that you want to do, and they'll walk you through the step. I got my mentors after that. And then that's when I was able to build my career and start my production company step by step, slowly build it to where I was able to sustain myself and my family. And now it's all I do, and we have a very good life. We're living in Istanbul. We love it. But it's because I was patient and I listened to my teachers. hardest decision I've ever had to make as a filmmaker would be on the film, my second feature film that I was making called The Warm Heart of Africa. And it's a film about orphans in Malawi, which is a landlocked country that borders Uganda in South in Africa, in eastern southern Africa. Malawi is one of the poorest countries in the world. It has 16 million people. 1 million of them are orphans due to the HIV/AIDS pandemic there. And so I went there to make this film about orphans. And in the process of making the film, when I came to edit the film, and I was blessed to have an A-list editor work on my film by the name of Ruth Shell, who's a Golden Globe nominated French editor of the year 2 times. So really, really good. And she actually ends up becoming my mentor through this process and being someone who carries me on and kind of carries me through my career afterwards. But there's a group of children, a family that I got really attached to in the film. And I really, really fell in love with them. It was 4 kids who were orphaned by their parents. And the oldest one was 18 and the youngest one was 14. They just live on their own, trying to make ends meet. And just have a life in Africa. And in the editing process, Ruth, my editor, told me that we had to cut them from the film. And I was heartbroken. The reason we had to cut them is that because they were, African children living in that environment, they all had their heads shaved. And they're brothers and sisters. And so they all looked the same. And so from that closeness of age to 18 to 14, throughout the film, you couldn't tell which character was which in which scene, because they were also very poor, so they would share clothes. So the clothes that Abe was wearing one day would be the clothes that Peter was wearing the next day. And so as a viewer of the film, you got confused. Like, who am I watching now? And so she said, it's not going to work. We had to cut them from the film. That has been, in my entire career, the hardest decision that I had to make, because I really, really loved them and I didn't want to cut them from a film. That was, I think, probably the most emotional, difficult decision I've had to make as a director to date.